what does Buddhism provide?
Through meditation, for me, really embodying this deep interconnection with all beings. And what I find is when I can really tune into that, and as you practice, just this upswelling of compassion.
Whether you're looking for inspiration, guidance, or simply a moment of reflection, you're in the right place. This is Wisdom Stripes. Hello and welcome to Wisdom Stripes. My name is Meg Tuohey, and today's episode is all about the intersection of social justice, embodiment practices, and the deep work of reconnecting with our true selves. Our guest today is Abby Shepard, a yogi, healer, and social justice advocate who has dedicated her life to helping others live more regenerative, fulfilling lives. Abby's work focuses on unlearning harmful social conditioning and creating liberatory ways of being, both individually and in community. As the Outreach and Communications Manager at Mountain Cloud Zen Center and a passionate volunteer for various social justice initiatives, Abby's mission is to bring together earth-based practices, wisdom traditions, and community engagement to inspire transformative change. Abby's journey has been shaped by personal experiences, spiritual awakening, and deep dives into the roots of oppression and liberation. Today, Abby will share her wisdom on breaking free from societal conditioning, embracing radical self-acceptance, and how we can all create space for healing and justice in our lives and communities. I'm honored to welcome Abby to today's episode. This is Wisdom Stripes, your no-nonsense, fierce fairy godmothers, guiding you to live with authenticity, challenge societal norms, and tap into your inner wisdom. Abby, we always start with the same question for our guests. What wisdom would you like a listener to come away with today?
Thank you so much for having me, Meg. It's so lovely to be here with you. Something that I'd love to share with those listening is a lot of the conditioning, and I speak from my own lived experience of growing up in the West and here in the United States, that the version of success, or what we're told is a successful life, is actually making us sick. And when we can wake up to the true reality of our world, then we can actually break free from that and do less harm and create more harmony between each other and the earth. And in Buddhism, which is one of the traditions that I practice in, wisdom is often defined as this knowing of our true nature. And that's often defined as impermanence, so everything's always changing, nothing stays the same. And interconnection, so we're all connected to each other, we're all connected to everything around us. And in Buddhism, there's no individual self. And what I would add to Buddhism's definition of wisdom is also recognizing the reality of this world. I grew up not aware of the systems in which we live. I did have a wonderful childhood, and I love my family and where I grew up. And by no fault of the people that I grew up around, I was blind to a lot of the harms that are created. And through a lot of mentors, a lot of teachers, a lot of experiences with really amazing communities, have been able to learn and am still learning about what it means to see these systems for what they are, these different systems of oppression like capitalism and white supremacy and colonialism and fat phobia and cis heteropatriarchy, so many of the intersections. And just making sure people know that we can live in a different way, and that creates a lot more connection for all of us.
They're very big words and very big ideas, and I love a big word and a big idea, so you're very welcome here. I'm really curious, though, how or where the journey began, or what precipitated the journey towards unpacking these big ideas. What was the turning point? What was the thing on your heart? What was the moment where you were like, enough, there must be a different way? What preceded the journey of wisdom in these spaces?
Great question. For me, I think it was really gradual. And I think there are like certain moments in my life that like were major turning points. And when I was in college, I studied music and psychology because I realized that musicians who go to study music at the college level, so these people who really love it and want to do what they love for their lives, were not taking care of themselves. They were being strained. They didn't know how to deal with performance anxiety. They didn't know how to take care of themselves in the practice room. And so I focused a lot on that in college. But my second year there, I had this wonderful graduate student who was giving me lessons. And she just made this side note about the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 2018 report, which was, they release reports every few years about the state of climate globally with a lot of different scientific evidence from across the world. And I knew nothing about what was going on. I was really focused on my schoolwork. And so I looked up that report later, and I just became really aware of the cognitive dissonance that was created because I grew up really close to the Great Lakes and close to nature and really appreciating the environment. And I was like, wow, I am living a life that is not aligned with what I say I value. And that set me off kind of on the path of the social justice side of things. And at the same time, I was studying psychology, and I had a friend recommend one of Thich Nhat Hanh's books to me. It was The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching. And that was my first encounter with Buddhism. And I really resonated with the teachings because it's much more, I think a lot of people are very familiar with mindfulness these days, but there's so much more depth to these teachings that have ethical foundations. And it's really about aligning your whole life with the teachings and the ethics and this practice. And I really resonated with it. So just kept practicing. And eventually those two kind of kept merging and informing each other, this meditation path and also this path of involvement and engagement in the world. And I took different classes. I was part of different organizing groups that taught me a lot about systems analysis. But I think the experience that was really a big turning point is in 2021. I spent the summer in Minnesota. There was a pipeline being built from Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin, and full of tar sands oil, which is the dirtiest oil there is. That you can transport in a pipeline. And so I was there to support the movement to stop this pipeline, which was going through indigenous land. It was also going through under the headwaters of the Mississippi River, which we know is really important waterway, and many other waterways. And I just had a moment where I was watching these amazing people, many of whom I was living with that summer, go to different actions, peaceful protests, and be received in a really violent manner by the police force that was there. And some of it was private police force hired by the corporation building the pipeline. Some of it was the local county police departments, but tear gas, rubber bullets. At one point, there was a massive march and they flew helicopters really, really close to these protesters, and it kind of created a dust storm. It really opened my eyes to how interconnected social justice issues are. And it also, I saw a lot of trauma being created in these organizing spaces that organizers don't really know what to do with. And that's where I really became passionate about this intersection between organizing, community advocacy, and the spiritual path things that can ground us, things that can give us the clarity and awareness to be able to shift the ways we relate to each other and to the earth.
That's very beautiful. I'm wondering, it sounds like you are following your heart and really listening to that inner guidance to search for the work that has been done before you that allows you to build your understanding of different frameworks and different ideas. And then you're also looking to take it to the next level as your shoulder of leadership, which I love. I'm wondering what that's like, because it doesn't, I'm reading, and I could be wrong, I'm reading that you don't come from that background, that it's something you've come upon as you've turned into a lovely adult who's now leading this piece of work for her own kind of life's purpose. I wonder, could you talk to us about if there's a connection between where you came from and what you're doing, and there's lots of you doing that from your community from which you grew up in the Great Lakes, or if you took these brave steps and then found your people?
I really appreciate this question because I've been looking more into my own ancestry recently. So it's been a path of discovery of like what is in my line, like going way back, like when my ancestors first came to this land. And one thing I do remember is my grandpa on my dad's side was always someone who was really involved with the community and was always helping people. And it's like a legacy that my dad tries to continue to remind us of. And so I think there's definitely parts of my family where this ethic of wanting to help people, especially when we have what we need, how can we share what we have with other people? I definitely learned that from my grandparents. I learned it from my parents as well, always seeing them trying to do what they could to help people within the framework that they knew. And even my dad at Christmas will give money to me and my sisters and say, donate this to a cause that you think is important. And so I definitely learned that from my parents. And I do think I'm a little bit different than some of my family in that, yeah, I've just gone a little bit different of a path that maybe sometimes they don't understand, but I know they appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love as I've been doing this ancestry work, I took a really wonderful course. They're called Comrades Education, used to be called Wide Awake. And they talk about the lineages that come from places you choose to practice in. And so that can be spiritual traditions. For me, that's the yoga tradition. It's Buddhism. At Mountain Cloud, we practice Sambo Zen. And it's also organizing traditions. There's a long history of people like me who have stepped into these organizing spaces in solidarity with people of all different kinds of identities to try to work for change. And so I'm kind of in the process of discovering who exactly those people are. But I think that's really what helps anchor me when I feel like, what am I doing in these spaces? Who am I to come into them? But to really remember, like, I am also harmed by these systems of oppression. And so I'm here doing my work to unlearn that and coming into spaces to be of support how I can to all these causes that I care about.
Mm-hmm. For those others listening who perhaps identify with being somebody who does something unusual from a family system perspective, so not making it right or wrong, but making it clear that it's different, right? And perhaps they're maybe not from such supportive, connected families, and their calling is just as loud and just as strong and just as true to have the heart to do this kind of work and be this kind of lead of change. I wonder, might you talk to that from your perspective?
I think there's a lot of people out there like you. So if you're feeling like that, you are certainly not alone. And I know I spoke to even my own family who maybe does something different. I know they align with me, but I think they also feel and I've experienced this too, when there's so much going on, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and then not know where to start and then not starting because the times that we're living in are really overwhelming. They're really scary, can create anxiety and fear and so many things. So I just want to validate that those experiences are common among a lot of people. And something I think where I really got my start was the benefit of so many people putting stuff online, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic when many of us were stuck at home for a long period. It was webinars, it was email newsletters, it was blog posts or social media posts from all kinds of different creators and thought leaders and social justice advocates. And so I think that's something that's really beautiful and a great place to start. If you're like, I want to do something, I think you have to start with what are you most passionate about? Like for me, I knew it was climate change and the climate crisis and climate justice. And for other people, it could be reproductive rights, it could be trans rights, it could be racial justice. Like there's so many different things out there. And each of us, I think, really taking a moment to slow down and connect with yourself and see what really lights you up. There's a really beautiful book by Omkari Williams called Microactivism. It's really short, it's really digestible, and it's a really great way. Omkari leads you through all these different ways to kind of figure out what engagement looks like for you in your life, because all of us have different life circumstances, so we can't all be out on the front lines stopping a pipeline, but we all have little ways in which we can connect with fellow humans. We can offer food to our neighbors, we can grow gardens and beautiful things like that. And so I think just finding small ways and not buying into the idea that you have to do everything in order to make a difference.
I think that does take the overwhelming out, doesn't it? For those that feel called, but also don't maybe fully identify with changing a whole lot of their life. There is a range of choice between perhaps someone like you and perhaps someone who isn't prepared or able to make such a systemic shift in their life. For whatever reason, no judgment. There is work or opportunity available for all of us to be able to contribute to I want to use a word with up in it, and I'm having trouble finding the right word. It's not uprising, it's not up-leveling, it's expanding maybe the way in which the beautiful human experience is had, particularly in these times of great uncertainty and big questions and big opportunities. With big questions comes big opportunities, also comes contributions required from everybody. Yeah, I love that. I'm wondering how your work in Buddhism connects with your social justice.
Yeah, there's a great example of that right now. So at Mountain Cloud Zen Center, this month, actually, well, official kickoff is tomorrow. We're doing a month of residency on Ecodharma. So Ecodharma is this cross-section of land-based environmental work with Buddhism. So it's really about asking the question of what does the more than human world, what do the trees and the plants and the animals and the earth have to teach us? How can we listen to that wisdom? And how does that inform our practice as Buddhist practitioners? And it's also asking, what does Buddhism have to offer to doing this work in a time of extreme uncertainty and extreme collapse in our natural systems?
Hey there, Meg Tuohey here with a quick and exciting announcement. As a psychologist, coach, and founder of the Wisdom Lab, I've had the privilege of helping thousands of individuals break free from the vicious cycles holding them back and tap into their infinite inner wisdom. If you're tired of feeling unheard, unseen, and stuck in the same old struggles, the Wisdom Lab is the breakthrough you've been yearning for. This on-demand program guides you through a powerful process to shatter emotional barriers, overcome deep-rooted blocks, and experience the profound transformation you deserve. In just 4 hours, you'll gain the tools and insights to revolutionize your life from the inside out. Want to learn more? Click or tap the link in the show notes for all the details. Okay, now back to the episode. What does Buddhism provide? What does Buddhism, how is it of great value to humanity for those who are perhaps not so familiar with it? They kind of like, I know what it is, but do we know what it is? Could you talk to us about what is the philosophy behind it at a deeper level than the introduction that you gave us, which was beautiful?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many layers. And I'll also preface this with there's so many different lineages of Buddhism. But at its heart, some of the core teachings that come from the person who we refer to as the Buddha is the Four Noble Truths and then the Eightfold Path. And the Four Noble Truths is about that suffering exists and the causes of suffering being our own craving and also aversion to things. So constantly grasping outside of ourselves or pushing things away. And that causes our suffering. And then that there's a path to relieving that suffering. And that path is the Eightfold Path. And I'm not going to be able to list all of them off the top of my head, but there's 8 different limbs. And there's ethical foundations. So we call them often the 5 precepts. If you're a monastic, sometimes there's more than 5 precepts. But it's things like not doing harm in the world and also, using our energy in a supportive manner and things of that nature. So it's very also like there's a lot of overlap between that and the 8-limb path of yoga. There's a lot of synergy between them. And one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this idea of interconnection, that's one of the teachings from Buddhism and really experiences. Because one thing that Buddhism offers is, there's all these teachings, but the biggest thing is teachers say, you have to go experience it for yourself. So sitting in meditation or doing walking meditation and like really living out and embodying the teachings to see if they're true. It's like, well, here's the teachings, but it's up to you to decide whether it's actually true. And so it's this experience, and through meditation for me, really embodying this deep interconnection with all beings. And what I find is when I can really tune into that, and as you practice, just this upswelling of compassion. And that is what in Zen Buddhism, they say we come back to the marketplace, which just means we come back to the world offering ourselves to do what we can to help relieve suffering in the world. So I think that's a big teaching. And also this idea, which comes from the idea of there being no self, that like you and I are not separate, that we are actually coming from this one energy source. There's a lot of different ways to frame it, but that's really been supportive. And I think the ethical foundations are also a major support because we are born into a world, like I'll take this idea of non-harming as an example. We're born into a world and systems that cause a lot of harm, and that often we don't have a choice but to participate in them. And so we can become aware of that, and we can try to divest ourselves from these systems of harm as we figure out how to embody this non-harming in our lives. And I think that's such a core thing to what my movement work or social justice work or community organizers are doing. They're trying to cause less harm and create systems that are life-giving rather than life-taking.
You live and work in the Buddhist space. And in doing so, you also add to that your activism. Have I got that right? Or do you live and work in your Buddhist space, which also includes activism?
I think it's both. Yeah.
Okay. How do you think your work contributes to your life kind of philosophy?
It's really hard for me to separate them. It's really something that's really deeply important to me is that the work that I do is aligned with my values. So, working for a place like Mountain Cloud Zen Center certainly supports and is aligned with my values. And I know that the teachings and the programs that they're offering are in support of reducing suffering in the world. And something beautiful about Mountain Cloud Zen Center is that we're also going through a lot of deep questions right now of what does it mean to be a Buddhist practitioner in modern times? Like these teachings are over 2,600 years old, and there's a lot of similarities of how we operate as human beings, and there's a lot of differences to what the world looks like now. And so some of that comes through in this eco-dharma work of how are we caretaking for this land, and how are we in relationship with the original stewards of this land, the Tewa people, who were the people who cared for this land before the Spanish came to colonize. And also, how are we making our space one that's really inclusive of everyone who needs access to these teachings? So in that way, I would definitely say that the social justice, the advocacy is intertwined in my work at Mountain Cloud Zen Center. And yeah, it's hard. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg, like which one comes first versus the other. They both feel like they support one another. So my work and my life, they just feel like there's so many places where they feed into each other. And I really love that because I can bring what I learned from volunteering at a local farm that's run by an Indigenous collective here, and I can learn things and then bring that back to Mountain Cloud or bring it back to how to grow my own garden or so many different things. And that's what I really love about the different spaces that I feel so lucky to be a part of.
You know, the reason I asked that question is I was curious about the threads that bind you. And I don't mean bind you as in shackle you. I mean more of the cord of who you are. And I had this hypothesis I was testing, which was it does seem to me that you have built a life that matches who you are on the inside. And so the last piece of that was how does your work fit with your other parts? That was my last piece. And then when you had trouble answering it because it was so intertwined, I sort of saw the image of, you know, how when you have a rope, it's often got lots of different threads. It's threads in a thread, and then it's threads in a thread in a thread, and then they're all threaded together. That's kind of what has come forth since you answered it, which is that it is quite connected. And a lot of the work that psychology does is in the space of helping people return to the parts of themselves that are really important and have their inside values or desires match their outside work. And it does seem quite resonant to me that you have manifested, that doesn't sound like you thoughtfully curated a life that does that. And that is an interesting conversation. Would you agree I'm in the right place, or would you like to change anything about what I said?
I would totally agree. I think that's one of the things I aim to do is that all parts of my life can be in alignment. And how can I actually divest from these systems that are causing so much harm that I know aren't in alignment? And, it's not fully possible. I still participate in this world. I'm not a monastic, so I haven't quite gotten to that point yet. Yeah, so I really appreciate you pointing that out. And it just reminds me also, I think each of us has that potential. And that also is kind of how I imagine this world is set up. Like we each are this part of this huge web of connections, and it's us, and it's the items that we're sitting on, and all of these things. So I really like that image.
Hmm. The next thing then that I want to ask you is really on behalf of the listeners who maybe have many conflicting feelings about this strength of yours, because I think it is quite a strength to be able to have the inside match the outside and have it so well intertwined. I think it is probably something that you've thoughtfully cultivated and is naturally a part of your disposition. I think it's probably both at this point. Could be wrong, happy to be wrong. But for those who are maybe not as integrated or don't have that sense of the intertwined ropes from the aspects of their life, of their values or what's important to them, and maybe their rope feels like it's a little extended and frayed, or it feels like it's not as tightly wound, or it hasn't quite got the shape that they wish that it would, what wisdom could you offer them?
I sometimes resonate with being frayed. I would also add that I also hold a lot of identities of privilege. I grew up in a middle class background that gave me the financial foundations to be able to choose to do work that doesn't make as much money, but that's aligned with my values, and that I, have the support networks and access to spaces that other people who have different collection of identities than I do probably wouldn't have had access to. So I just wanted to name that as well. And so for those listeners who maybe feel like you aren't able to do that, also know that it's not totally your fault. That these systems are actually designed to try to keep us separated, to keep us and make it easy for us to keep participating in them. And we are constantly getting messages to participate in consumerism and buy the next latest thing. We're constantly getting the messages that we should buy a house and we should have a family and we should have this great corporate job. And so while we have responsibility to like wake up to this, I also say this without any judgment for anybody who feels like they don't have that, or they know they want to live a different life, but it feels really difficult. And I'd come back to just starting in really small ways. Again, it can be really overwhelming. And I think so. I started meditation before I got involved with community organizing. And I really think that was a lifeline and brought the awareness, the emotional intelligence, the clarity that I needed to know where my heart wanted to go, where my intuition was telling me to go. And I think that's a lifelong process, learning how to trust that when our culture definitely doesn't want us to trust our intuition. So it might not be meditation for everybody. That's not necessarily what I'd recommend, but some way to like find a way to connect. So for some people that's being out in nature and like going for a hike in the woods, and for some people that's art or it's music, and just finding something that allows you the space to really connect and figure out what your values are, or like what is your body telling you that your body like wants you to be living in a certain way. So like what is your heart telling you, rather than constantly thinking about the logic? Because if I always followed the logic, I certainly wouldn't be here right now.
What a beautiful, beautiful answer. And the last part of that is, could you speak to the courage or the strength or the grace or the hardships that come with following your own path when perhaps it's unfamiliar, A, to you, and B, to your loved ones?
Yeah, there's a lot of, and not necessarily pushback all the time, but there's just misunderstanding of when you're not in someone else's shoes, you don't always understand what that person is doing. And I think that's where community, like one, the practices where you're connecting to your intuition, but I also think that's where community is really helpful. So finding people in your life that do get it. I've been really lucky to find people in my life who are really supportive of me wanting to move across the country to a place I've never been and are willing to support that and just get it. Or many of the other things. And I think having that community or friends who can kind of be a sounding board, but also can be supportive of like, yeah, I get it. Maybe they're not on the exact same path, but they also see how these systems are harmful, or they have shared values. So they can be like, yeah, I get why you're doing it and I support that. But it is hard. And sometimes what I've been finding recently, well, and in the land tax project that I'm a part of, we talk about different kinds of wealth. And that community really is the wealth that builds the resilience we need. I think a lot of the like stories that I got as I was growing up was, oh, you just need to like make enough money. And then when you have enough money, you can like get a house. And it was all about like me. How can I make myself secure? And when a system is collapsing, like what we're witnessing now, the money isn't always going to mean something. And it doesn't really give us fulfillment either. And community can give us fulfillment. It can give us people to rely on when the systems are collapsing. Is what builds real, true resilience. And it's hard. It's also hard to find community and find people who are willing to do that. But a great way is mutual aid networks. So if folks are interested, that's like a really like offering food to the community. And that's a really great way to plug in and start to like build those connections and networks in your community.
It does sound like within all that you've shared today, there's a lot of mentorship and menteeship where you're giving and receiving. So those that come before you, I think, offer a lot of certainty or words for ways that people might feel, being able to name the discomfort they have and introduce them to new ways of looking at things. And also then that person can offer it to the next iteration of people who are awakening to what's important to them, what's on their heart, and finding ways to make sense of the discomfort they might have between how they are living and how they are observing the world, and maybe what their heart is telling them. Because often when it's the non-dominant narrative, we have to figure it out bit by bit. And so it does sound like a lot of this is passed through human connection, be it digital or in person. And so I like that you have offered pathways to find those people that allow the lights to come on in a way that's meaningful to the individual who's listening, that feels called to this work, be it one step of contribution or many steps of contribution. Yeah, I think that's lovely.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, we've found ourselves at the lovely end of our conversation. And the last question that our community has of you is a very broad one. And it is around, what last piece of wisdom would you like to leave us with today?
Thank you. I'd want to just offer encouragement. It can be really scary to think about letting go of the ways of being that we've come to know. And there is so much opportunity for more freedom and more love and more connection and fulfillment when we really devote ourselves to unlearning these harms and relearning other ways of being that are supportive of life. And there's really great resources out there. I'll just, if it's okay, I'll name a few of my teachers just to honor their contribution to my path. One is Reggie Hubbard, who runs Active Peace Yoga. And he does a lot of the same work integrating this intersection of social justice and Buddhism and meditation and yoga. And Michelle Johnson, who I did my teacher training with her. Carrie Kelly, who has a really great book called American Detox that talks a lot about like working through this process so we can all truly be well. And there's so many other teachers and resources out there. Green Dreamer podcast is also a really great one. But I also want to leave listeners with a quote from the author Richard Powers, who said in an interview with Atmos magazine a few years ago that the only well-being is interbeing. And that's something that really sticks with me as I go through the different areas of my life.
And it is how you started, isn't it? Is that we are all interconnected and we are all one.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Meg. It's been a joy.
I'd like to thank Abby Shepard for joining me today on Wisdom Stripes. In today's episode, we explored her incredible journey at the intersection of social justice, spiritual wisdom, and embodiment practices. Her insights on breaking free from societal conditioning and creating a space for healing and justice are truly inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an update. You can connect with Abby on Instagram at abs_sheps, and you can connect with me on Instagram at Meg Tuohey Official. Thank you for listening to another episode of Wisdom Stripes. I hope you gained a little wisdom today. My name is Meg Tuohey, and this is Wisdom Stripes. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wisdom Stripes. Follow me on at Meg Tuohey Official and leave a comment and review. I'm looking forward to meeting you here next time on Wisdom Stripes.